And we welcome you back. As I said in the previous session, in this second half we will drill a little deeper, exploring why we might want to get all the data our governments are holding. Why do we want it as individuals or as citizens? Citizens involved in commercial enterprises, citizens as community organizations, citizens as individuals. They all benefit from the data we and they have paid for. So I shall begin by focusing a bit on who benefits from open data, why, and how. To answer that, we will take a look at the types of data and data held by governments that may or may not be accessible to taxpayers, broadly defined. I hope I won't seem too negative, and maybe I already have, but we do have to grapple with the challenges often facing us in getting the people's data. Sometimes those government hurdles are purposely erected by politicians and government agencies, but I think just as often they are constructed out of philosophical, cultural, and technical ignorance. Ignorance in perceiving that the information ecosystem has shifted dramatically from atoms of ink on paper to electronic bits and bytes that need new methods to both protect the data while today maximizing its utility. Accordingly, there also seems to be a lack of ongoing training for public employees in what specific applications can do. For instance, many public servants seem to think that their application can only produce PDF files. They didn't know that a PDF is a secondary output of a document created by Microsoft Word or Excel. Those .docs or docs XLS or .csv files being something close to the native file formats. The status of data access. As you may have surmised, government, or more specifically people working in government, are not always on the side of taxpayers when it comes to making our data easily available. I'll show you some examples of obstacles my colleagues and I have encountered when trying to get access to your and my data. Sometimes the data formats may work perfectly well for those using something like an accounting system every day, but that can be going on in a galaxy far, far away and different from what a non-accountant, even someone skilled in quantitative analysis, might need. What is the status today of getting access to your data? I'll walk us through the step-by-step process of requesting and ultimately receiving a list of pet licenses in Santa Fe County. That's a success story. However, a request for revenue data from the Santa Fe County Clerk's office was pretty much a train wreck, even though the clerk, Catherine Clark, really did want to be helpful. But that tale of recent yore will demonstrate the important difference between an inward-looking administrative focus instead of what is termed public-facing presentations of the people's data. All of this, however, raises inevitable issues involving data privacy and protection. The challenge here has multiple facets. First, privacy is a too generic and broad term. As we shall see, the idea of privacy has multiple subsets, varying widely depending on cultures, conditions, and context. Another facet of the term privacy is that major global commercial organizations seem to be far, far ahead of U.S. governments when it comes to focusing on understanding and working to control varying degrees of privacy. Even companies like Google, Amazon, and Facebook recognize this, largely not because of moral or ethical concerns, but because of potential financial vulnerability. Finally, I shall close with some thoughts about what can we do? What must we do to adopt and adapt to this new digital information environment to retain our participatory democracy? I have emphasized the difference between transparency and open data. If we, in fact, are able to have something approaching if not a full governmental cup of the open data philosophy, policy, implementation, why should citizens care? And perhaps most importantly, who benefits from open data? Let's start with citizens. Citizens in an open, democratic society. I suggest that if you are interested in how your taxes are used, you might be interested in open data. Where is that money coming from? Property taxes, gasoline taxes, bond issues? How about taxes on plastic bags at the grocery store? Note well that one about the bag tax. Good luck in trying to trace those dollars and cents. My wife and I have a standing offer of a $500 prize to any high school student or team who can find that money in the city's accounts. And how about medical or retail marijuana transactions? All of these are, or should be, variables in building governmental budgets and legislation. All of those factors tie to which elected officials are sponsoring which bills that relate to the geography of your state or their districts, factors you might find of interest when making decisions in the ballot box. If you are curious about who's getting the contracts to do what from your governments, you can answer those questions by tapping open data. If you are interested in how well government agencies are performing on behalf of you and your fellow citizens, you might also be interested in open data. If we were doing this in person, I could run a whiteboard drill and ask you to suggest topics you would be interested in knowing more about. Given our online conversations today, if you wish, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen to suggest points of inquiry. So, who benefits from open data? I first heard of the open data concept 8 or 10 years ago from a seminar student. He was from Bulgaria. Within a few weeks, I discovered that the topic was coming up in listserv postings from people in places like the Philippines and even South Sudan. They were interested, and I was interested, as a citizen and as a journalist, in how can we see what my government is doing? Surely access to such data would be beneficial to me and fellow citizens. I was wrong, sort of. Do I sense some skepticism when I say open data and South Sudan in the same sentence? How about this then? Yep, a South Sudan data portal. Seems to hold a measure of promise. At least here there are basic national statistics, maps, and bottom right, a link to more data. Note just the beginning of the data catalog listings at the bottom. Yes, the data is sometimes far from current, but at least someone in one of the world's poorest countries recognizes the value and import of data when it comes to decision making. So I said back then I was initially attracted to open data as a citizen and as an analytic journalist who was wondering, how can we see what my government, our governments are doing? Surely access to such data would be beneficial to many people like me, both professionally and as a voter. Turned out I was wrong. Who are the primary beneficiaries from open data? Yes, surprise of surprises. Investigating the concept of open data, we quickly learned that government employees are the first beneficiaries of open data. Why? That's because much, perhaps most, of the government workers' time is devoted to searching for, finding, retrieving, and then doing something with data. And that data, today typically digital, is often stored in other offices or other agencies or who knows where. Call them public employees, public servants, government workers, whatever. And a broader term, sort of in vogue in academia and the Census Bureau, is information workers. Maybe that's like saying a janitor is a building engineer, but there you have it. Still, there is a lot of research in the past 20 or 30 years into what people do on their job and how that should be termed. And all those documents being created and managed are likely not, or don't have to be, atoms of ink and paper. Today they are or should be in those electrically charged ones and zeros. Today those information workers are no longer paper shufflers. They and the data jockeys, the analysts, are moving bits and bytes from one data bin to another, or within data silos, or across data silos. So another 50% of the workday is spent dealing with colleagues in a variety of ways, with a variety of digital documents and related applications. When I say working with those documents, that means working in a variety of ways. And that typically means looking for stuff. Where's the file I need? How is that file tagged to make it searchable? Do I have the most recent version? Do I have the version that my colleagues are looking at and working on? Too often, 40% of the time, the search effort is for naught, depending on the age of the agency's intranet architecture. So the information worker tries to get the job done by duplicating somebody's previous work. Now, this research is a few years old. Has the data creation and management environment changed? Surely it has. But has it changed for the better? Maybe yes, maybe no. The growth in the data to be managed has increased exponentially in the past 15 to 20 years. On the other hand, the sophistication of data set architecture and search engines has also grown. The concomitant utility in those changes depends on the perspective of the administrators and the funding for digital technology, personnel, and training, or at least we hope so. So, back to the original question, who benefits from the open data? Implementing open data is not cheap, at least initially, in terms of time and hence money. But once in place, it can pay off to all of our advantages. When done well, open data results in savings for government and therefore taxpayers. Examples. Here are a couple of examples. Chicago, filling all those pesky Freedom of Information or inspection of public records requests takes time. Time equals dollars from the account. Apply the open data philosophy and the number of requests drops, something that is of concern to many of county clerks and other officials in the state of New Mexico. In San Francisco, we see that applying open data for something as simple as real-time bus maps and moving bus locations and then the literal calls for help goes down. Again, money saved, and perhaps more important, citizen respect for the system increases. Major dailies in the traditional snow belt have found that putting GPS locators on snow plows, giving residents when and where the plows are in their neighborhood, again enhances approval and respect for local government. California posted its inventory of cars and trucks for a trivial dollar investment. Curious citizens did some slicing and dicing of the data and were able to see the redundancies in different state agencies, encouraging agency-specific vehicles where a sister organization already had some that were being underused. And the good people of Texas entered the auditing playing field when they went over state contracts for everything from accumulated photocopies to prison menus. These are citizens doing this kind of audit. Save a couple million here, a couple million there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. Maybe enough to spruce up the state's electrical system, you think. And there's another surprise, something I just hinted at when open data is put in play. These anecdotes and related research illustrate that when government agencies make their data available, citizens appreciate it. I recall a meeting in Mexico City where an attendee from Sicily, not southern Sudan this time. Anyway, this fellow reported that his countrymen and women were constantly complaining that their legislators never did anything. Like most legislatures, the real work takes place in committees. Citizens couldn't appreciate that because they literally couldn't see those legislators as committee members at work. Ultimately, when a bill is passed by a committee and is ready for vote, it is presented on the floor of the House or the Senate. There might be some debate and then there are votes. time for debate, but often not. It's only then, at least in the past, when citizens could literally see their representatives doing work. That did change a bit in our legislators' 60-day session just completed. We could see the committees at work. And that's what happened in Sicily, when the people could literally see the videos of the debate and the cutting and pasting going on in committee sessions. And with that, respect for what government did seemed to improve. I don't know if that has happened in New Mexico just yet. These examples may suggest that open data is only for large and complex governments. Are they the limited examples of government complexity? How about Santa Fe's government? How complex is municipal government, even in a relatively small city like Santa Fe? Here is the city's organizational chart as of 2018. There are 72 nodes on this chart. It's a flock, a herd, a gaggle of administrative silos. Of those 72, somewhere between 13 and 15 are what seem to be major sections of authority, and that means major mother lodes of narrowly defined data applications and data sets. The city of Santa Fe still has 12 of what I would call major departments, each of which has between 3 and 7 subdepartments. All of the 12 were somewhat reorganized in 2020 under 3 major categories: community engagement, community development, and community health and safety, each with its own director. That's perhaps fine for management purposes, but it doesn't seem to change the reality of the data environment. Each of these departments seems to have hardware and software unique to its needs. I don't know what are the city's current plans for managing data. I do know from experience, however, that we have had a widely dispersed system. Apparently there were no standards for the basic requirements of compatibility of hardware and import and export of data. Each department decided what it needed and bought it when possible. Sometimes managers of those systems didn't even know the capabilities of their technologies. For example, a couple of years ago, we requested some data from the police department. At that time, it was still using an IBM computer first introduced in the late 1980s. The department IT people said that they could only export data as PDF reports. A 5-minute search on the Google indicated multiple software updates available literally for decades, which made it possible to spit out the data as Excel or comma-separated values files. Apparently there are no standards for the basic requirements of compatibility of hardware and import and export of data. Each department decided on what it needed and went ahead and used it. This data architecture design is sometimes termed inward-facing data structures. It is rather narrowly designed to give data, and often certain pieces of a data set, to a limited number of individuals, and only those working in the department or the few who have been uniquely granted permission to tap the data sets. Now let's get real. As I said a few minutes ago, much of today's information workers' time is spent in collaboration with others, both colleagues in and just as often those from other departments. What if the government adopted the public-facing philosophy of open data? That is, if administrators started with the assumption that all the people's data should, by default, be made public. How will that contribute to the community? Yes, we should start with public-facing open data, but as we shall see in a few minutes, there are many cases where multiple aspects of the data set should remain under wraps. But as I suggested in the first session, my hunch is that is only about 15% of the data held by government, and only that impinges on individuals' privacy. That's only a guess, because I know of no local government that has conducted a thorough inventory of the data it holds. Recall that I said a few minutes ago, too, that the first beneficiaries of open data, that is, data that is easy to find, access, it's interoperable, it's reusable, the beneficiaries are people working in government. Here's an easy scenario. Imagine that you're an administrator in the police department. Your task is to plan how to deploy your officers, when and where, during the 3 summer months in Santa Fe. Let's assume it will be a pre-COVID summer. What data will you need and where will you get it? Obviously, a calendar would be a starting place, but whose calendar? Tourism might have the events and calendar laid out that you could get the information there, the data there. What else? Well, maybe Parks and Rec, which would have the Fuego schedule and perhaps that of a forthcoming soccer tournament that will require some security officers, if not perhaps traffic enforcement, given the rabid fans. Oh, and remember what tourism had about the dates for folk art market and the other big 3? Those are going to probably call for some overtime hours and hence pay. So when we say public-facing data, we are including first and maybe foremost government employees in that category, public. They are the ones who will be searching for, retrieving, and using the data that we, the public, have paid for. If we were doing this lecture face-to-face, I would give you an assignment to come up with 5 different intra-department data collection and collaboration scenarios and give you 5 minutes to do so. I'm sure you could do it with great ease. Additional values to the adoption of open data? I'm not done yet. Yes, open data is the feedstock for development and growth in every sector of a city, state, or national economy. Let's say you want to start a small business. How about a pet grooming business, a grand spa for Fido and Muffy? You're going to first, I hope, do some research, get some data related to pets and pet stores. First on your research to-do list, start big and broad. That doesn't necessarily mean government data. Are pets and pet care a big deal in America? Yep. The North American Pet Health Industry Association reported that the pet health industry sector for the U.S. and Canadian economy posted a combined gross of written premiums of $1.42 billion in 2018. It was up from $1.15 billion in the previous year. The total number of pets insured reached 2.3 million at year-end 2018. It was up by over 17% too. Here we have millions of U.S. households with pets. Check the annual expenses per household. If you have a pet, maybe you too suspect this dollar amount is on the low side. But do governments collect data about pets? You know where this is going, I bet. Hello, census. How many pet-related establishments are in a specific county? For us, pets and pet care might also include anything from dog biscuits to pet stores and chicken feed. But the data will give us a start. These are examples of the people's data already online. And as I said, I find the U.S. Bureau of Census to be head and shoulders above all government agencies in terms of making its data easily available for anyone. And it's also an agency with deep-seated ethical, moral, and truth-telling standards. So all these national indicators seem promising resources to lay a rational foundation for our pet idea, pet spa, its dream, our dream, the dog's dream. How can we focus more on our locality? Does our Santa Fe need such a spa? Turns out there's a rich and maybe obvious source, local pet licenses. What if you had the pet license data set? What might an entrepreneur learn? We can get an idea by actually applying for a license. If we spend some time with the Google, you can probably find this page. Aha, pet licensing. Surely that will be the place to go. Well, I guess not. We're already on the pet licensing designated link. So how do we actually apply for a license? It's going to take some time until you find that not the county, but the Santa Fe Humane Society issues pet licenses. Then it becomes pretty straightforward. Start a new registration and we see a rather standard form, owner's name, address, etc. But this already looks good because if we can get this data, we would be able to build a map showing where the pet owners live, which would be an important indicator when we're looking to locate a shop somewhere in town. Now, this is really getting interesting. If the license form simply asks, do you want a license for a dog or a cat, and stop there, well, yeah, helpful, but limited, especially when the license information like name and breed is at our hand. Why name? One of the earliest fun projects for analytic journalists 25, 30 years ago was to write feature stories based on the most popular pet names in the city. And those stories were well read. Let's drill a little deeper. Bingo, a marketer's dream. What can we do with a list of dog names and addresses? How about direct and social media mail that mentions the dog by name? Or a list of addresses by breed? Sponsor breed-specific social events at a city or a neighborhood dog park. How about some special treatment sales by breed? Hey, come on down, we're having a Water Spaniel Tuesday. Come down for a nail trimming or a teeth cleaning. Did a new vet just come into town? Sponsor a free heartworm checkup with your new canine spa. You could probably come up with a dozen more in 20 minutes or so. Okay, you say, show us that license data. I will, but first let me walk through what it takes to get that data. Recall that I discussed both the Federal Freedom of Information Act and the New Mexico state equivalent, or Inspections of Public Records Act, which we were told to use in the previous session to get building permits. Here's what it took successfully to get the pet license data. I was traveling down the often winding trail of making a public records request for two things: a digital file of all the animal licenses for Santa Fe County between January 1st, 2018 and March 1st, 2021, and the contracts between the Santa Fe County and the Animal Shelter and the Humane Society to see what those were all about. So on March 1st, I filed a IPRA request to the Animal Control Secretary, the closest thing to a records custodian on the Animal Control webpage. I also sent it in simultaneously to the county records custodian. The custodian, the county records, promptly sends me a message that she has forwarded my request to the proper department. Who knows what that was, which turned out to be, in her interpretation, the sheriff's department. The sheriff's department, within a day or two, quickly says, no, they're not the right people. Send it back to the animal shelter. So the sheriff's department also, though, sent my request to the county legal department. This happens on March 4th. This is relatively fast. Remember, I filed on the 1st. I'm getting this kind of communications by the 4th. That's good because they have to tell us within 3 days that they have received our request. So we wait. And on March 11th, I send a little nudging memo to the sheriff and to the county attorney saying, I remember my request. And it was a clarifying reply came back from the county attorney's office saying, tell us again what you want. So I respond and I say, yes, here's what my request was. I want the digital files and I want that contract. Didn't hear anything, but finally on March 15th, which is within the 15-day response time, I get the licenses from the county attorney, except that they come to me as a PDF file and then also as a Word file. All right, this is not data that you can do anything with. You can't analyze those things. Fortunately, I have a program that I have paid for that allows me to take a PDF or a Word file and convert it into Excel, which now puts in a spreadsheet where I can see the number of records, do some summations on the number of licenses, some very basic analysis. But that also means that we have to start cleaning the data. And every data set is dirty. They're all dirty data. There's going to be problems in there no matter where the data is coming from. You could have duplicate names for the pets, for example. You could have duplicate licenses. It was pretty dirty, but this just comes with the territory. You have to clean it. And so I start cleaning the data, and in a day or two, I'm able to start doing some analysis on it. Suddenly, unexpectedly, on March 18th, they have sent me the Excel file, which I had asked for. So this is good. Having the Excel file, which we'll see in a minute, allows us to really tease some information out of that. And so the project continues, and we update it in a logbook. A logbook for this kind of thing is important to keep track of what you did when, so when things go off the rails, you can kind of go back and backtrack your process and see how this analytic process is going to work, and where it went wrong or where you should continue. So we continue now, we have the data in hand, and we can start to review it. Recall that I first received the pet license file as a PDF file, which looks like this. Imagine if you printed this out. It would look like a regular printed ink on paper page. How would you count the number of licenses? How would you count the number of dogs in each breed category? How would you begin, using a pencil and paper, to sort and sum the number of pets in each zip code? I suppose it could be done by hand in our small city, but doing it for Phoenix or Dallas or Denver, you get the idea. If the file comes in a Word format, which it did, all those issues remain just the same. But those licenses are available as an Excel file, and now we're cooking. Each row is a record for an individual license. Each row or record is filled with appropriate variables of great interest to our pet spa project. Now we can, first, make sure we store that original file as a safe and an untouchable file, and then start to do some analysis on a copy of the original. That is very important. Never do any slicing or dicing on the original downloaded file. Always work with a copy or copies. Now we can see in these separate tabs the beginning of our analysis of pet licenses in Santa Fe County for the past 18 months. I don't have time to show you the favorite dog names. Send me a request and I will send you the Excel file and you can play with it as you wish. A quick review of our potential pet license project. Yes, we received the data, after some back and forth, within the required 15-day response period. No, we asked for it as an Excel file. Instead, we received a PDF and Word file, neither of which are conducive to analysis. Ergo, a taxpayer would have to spend time and money to translate the data into something that could be even counted, for starters. Can we analyze the data? Well, yes, we can after we have it, but only after we spend some time doing some transformation. Do we know who actually has the data? Nope. I never did receive the contract with the Colorado-based company that seems to have built the license application form. If it were crucial to the project, I could keep hammering away until we got it. That said, yes, it's going to help our pet spa project. We can see breeds, addresses, zip codes, and as we said, even the name of the animal. Finally, I hope this demonstrates the role that people's data can play in economic development. While dog licenses are a limited, focused example, the government data, if it is open data, presents an almost infinite resource for a multitude of economic activities. So, who uses similar request techniques to require our data at both the local and national level? Who benefits? One category of beneficiaries remains. Currently at the bottom of our list of beneficiaries are citizens and journalists, at least when measured by the number and proportion of FOIA and IPRA requests that are filed. Citizens and journalists. Surprised? Let's see who's making the Federal Freedom of Information Act requests and the state and local equivalents. Which will it be? More journalists? More citizens? Nope. It's the commercial interests and lawyers who tap the FOIA pipeline. And they do it very well. More than 1/2 of all requests, not lawsuits, but just FOIA requests, are filed by those two categories of businesses and lawyers, which could often overlap. Specifically, what institutions are knocking on the doors of government agencies? Note the number one requester is not IBM, it's something called International Business Research. What is IBR? International Business Research is an international, double-blind, peer-review, open-access journal published by the Canadian Centre of Science and Education. This journal is published monthly in both print and online versions to keep readers up to date with the latest developments, whatever that means. Note, too, that 5 of these 6 categories are tapping data held by the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, suggesting that clearly government data has significant economic value. And here's a surprise. Who from the University of New Mexico, even more so than the University of Chicago and Harvard, who's hitting what federal agency with FOIA requests and why? This is the kind of story idea journalists can find, one that is driven by data research. It's the, that's odd, I wonder why. In this case, I have no idea, and I welcome your suggestions. So we have an increasing number of institutions and individuals seeking the people's data from all levels of government. Here in New Mexico, one of the things city and county administrators complain most about is that they are bombarded with all of these citizens in various capacities filing these darn IPRAs, Inspection of Public Record Act requests. Why? Responding to those takes too much staff time and it's costly, they assert. Well, my friends, if you would just adopt the open data perspectives and put most of the people's data on time, you'd save a lot of time and money. That said, my simplistic suggestion to put all online comes with some caveats. Specifically, do we really want to have all the data held by government openly available? But as I'm sure many of you have recognized, access to and use of the people's data is not a clear-cut set of circumstances. It comes with major amplified and new conditions and ethical aspects. If the data is about you, quite specifically you, whose data is it? My friend Professor George Duncan, who is often lectured here and is on the Renesan Program Committee, has written extensively about this exact topic in his book Statistical Confidentiality, and what he and his co-authors term the dilemma of data stewardship. I'm sure our local bookstore will order it for you, and Duncan would be glad to put his autograph on the page, perhaps even with a warm personal note. Duncan and his co-authors write that, quote, all organizations that capture, store, integrate, and disseminate information or data must, and early on, recognize their responsibility and the tension between making the data easily and readily available while protecting the data from evildoers. That requires simultaneously providing and guaranteeing confidentiality. At the same time, organizations must provide sufficient and well-vetted data necessary for research and analysis. That R&A, research and analysis, applies to both in-house efforts and the data desired by outsiders. All this boils down to who can get what data under what circumstances, and how good is that data. One way to think about this is in terms of PII, personal identifiable information. We can visualize PII on a couple different axes. First, consider your personal, sometimes very personal data. Surely there are some things about you that you want to be public to varying degrees, depending on who's asking. Things like your address or phone number in case you need an EMT, or your house is on fire, or your dog has disappeared. On the other end are perhaps your DNA. If the health insurance company can get that and determine some preconditions, you might not be able to get insurance or only very expensive coverage. At the same time, we can consider our individual and collective data on a continuum of contributing to the public good. The COVID pandemic is an impressive example of that. Do we want or care if others know we have been tested? If so, do we want or care if others know the results of that test? And how will we determine others? Our spouse, yes. Our immediate family, yes. Our extended family, well, maybe, and if so, to what degree? Should the community know? Probably, but only if our personal information, name, address, etc., can be restricted or atomized, which is a term used by demographers and privacy researchers describing degrees of anonymity. Let me propose that one of the ways we might determine these degrees of privacy under dynamic circumstances could be to build a tool that would let citizens express their opinion about data privacy and data management. Governments already have decades of data about you, starting with your birth certificate. That data is useful for multiple agencies, corporations, and individuals under multiple and highly varied circumstances and needs. Wait, church attendance? Yeah. If you walk into a church service with your cell phone turned on, it is sending out both a signal to cell towers, and if the Google geolocation app is active, it is capturing literally not just where you are, but what establishment or building you have entered and when, all of which shows up on a handy map. Your DNA, have you sent a swab from your cheek to 23andMe to do some research on your genetic origins? If so, you are not the only one possessing your data. But your DNA could help drive decision-making if it helps the community anticipate medical needs, cardiac care, agencies to assist with early dementia, etc. How about a registry of birth defects? You probably know about families dealing with difficult and challenging circumstances there. Creating such a registry, however, raises its own set of issues. Ask, what is a birth defect? What needs to be the level or degree of identification of these cases? What is or could be the public good in knowing the location of such events? Surely that data could be crucial in identifying and tracking environmental hazards. I'm sure you can quickly recognize the multi-level degrees of complexity that our society, in the contemporary digital data ecosphere, needs to start considering. And so how might we do that? How might we figure out what privacy factors should be revealed to whom, when, and how? It would be possible to build a digital tool that could be useful in collecting data from focus groups. A touch service application that would allow individuals to move tokens like these variables around on a grid's surface. The centroid of each token could be reordered, generating a positioning numeric value reflecting individual preferences. Those preferences could be analyzed just as pollsters collect and analyze individual opinion data. Now, it wouldn't be perfect, polls never are, but we might see some trends in data personal awareness, or in personal data awareness. Those trends could be an asset for legislators and policymakers when they are faced with making decisions about PII, personal identification information. I'm sure you can see that this isn't just a local or U.S. issue. In fact, many nations are literally decades ahead of us in thinking about administration and management of personal data. The big difference between us and many, if not most, other nations is that they literally see personal data as personal. not something to be controlled by corporations. Control of that data belongs to the individual. The Germans were onto this topic of data privacy 30 years ago. The German Federal Commission for Data Protection and Freedom of Information is tasked with supervision and protecting an individual's data, as well as acting as an ombudsman when it comes to freedom of information issues. The latter was introduced with the German Freedom of Information Act in 2006, and in 2016 it became an independent federal agency in accordance with EU regulations. Note, however, that these concerns have been addressed in Germany for nearly 30 years. Likewise with our friends to the north. Canada has had a privacy commissioner and officer for at least 15 years. And note here that it focuses on both its federal government institutions and specifically how businesses must handle personal information in the course of commercial activities. We do have a Federal Privacy Act, but it focuses on how federal agencies and personnel deal with an individual's data. Think, for example, about restrictions on IRS workers who have access to an individual's tax records, or Social Security people who can get at those similar kinds of records and can't pass that data around. Are you feeling secure, Mr. Trump? We do have similar restrictions forbidding release of personal data by government employees in New Mexico. Okay, the bewitching hour is near. Let's see if we can sum this up. Please remember and even remind your friends, government employees, and politicians that transparency is not the same thing as open data. Just looking at the data is not the same as having it available for analysis. And that's what all of us need. Citizens, politicians, employees, we need that. If you can, encourage government administrators to commit to building in-house digital capacity among their workers. I believe that in today's digital information environment, if information workers aren't spending at least 10% of their work week researching, experimenting, testing, and cross-training their colleagues in the rapidly emerging technologies, then we're losing efficiency and eventually tax dollars. When it comes to dealing with contractors and vendors, we need to set and enforce standards in every vendor contract. First, the details of the actual contract must be easily available to all taxpayers and not as a PDF. Remember, PDFs are used to create are not used to create original documents, so there is always an underlying application like Word or Excel that is required to generate the PDF. Secondly, all data collected must be exportable in the native file format like Word or Excel, and it should be easily found and exportable as a CSV, comma-separated value, or a text.txt file. Third, all vendor training materials and any updates must be used by government employees must be generally available to taxpayers. After all, we paid for it. Remember my implied contract argument? Fourth, government employees need to have access to the algorithms vendors use to produce any data displayed for government purposes. This one's going to be a very tough battle because vendors will claim their algorithms are their company's secret sauce, the thing that sets them apart from the competition, their intellectual property. Okay, but unless we know what goes into the recipe producing a data point, the contributing definitions and quality vetting, then we have no way of testing the validity of that data. All of these will be for naught, however, if we can't change the culture, the philosophy of government service, so that all public servants are imbued with the overriding mission of constantly asking, how can we make our data easily available to taxpayers? How might we, citizens, accomplish that? One relatively easy shortcut to driving that needed change might be to simply change job titles from public records custodian to public records provider. The former and current designation implies holding on to the office's data for dear life. But provider, now there's someone who is helping citizens and the community. Have you ever met a librarian who didn't want you to find a book? Nope. Librarians are providers first, custodians second. Next, become evangelists for the theology that is called public-facing data versus internal or agency-facing or agency-centric data. In other words, we have to impress upon elected and professional government employees that for multiple reasons, embracing open data is a win-win. They will be better informed because they can reach across the departmental data silos, be more effective in finding the data they need, and ultimately take great pride and pleasure in their work so long as they appreciate the process of constant learning. One of the fundamental propositions of any business, especially wholesale and retail businesses, is that management has to know the items and value of their inventory. What I've seen is that government administrators often have no idea of the totality and status of the data in their departments. Who is monitoring the status of employee training, the status of vendor contracts, the nature of application updates, changes in the vendor's category to see if something better has emerged? Next, keep an eye out for the relatively new term in public administration, Chief Data Officer. These people are popping up in all levels of government, and they are especially responsible not for just overseeing the hardware and software components of the information age, but more importantly, they are responsible for the inventories and, better yet, the integration of data throughout a definable government system. Someone with a lot of power to direct the integration of all the agency's data and the people that it serves, first the public and simultaneously the agencies. We need such a person sitting outside of the mayor's office and involved in most meetings. We need such a person meeting daily with the county's chief administrator. We need such an individual as a primary advisor to the governor. So please help sell that concept. Finally, and this will be a big legislative hill to climb, our state would benefit from what I call the data impact analysis. Here's why. The idea of creating a data impact analysis, sure, go ahead, call it DIA, would be a procedure flowing out of the existing financial impact report. This is New Mexico's legislation that says every bill introduced in the Roundhouse must be accompanied by a report prepared by the Legislative Finance Committee showing the predicted cost of that statute or directive and the fiscal pros and cons. The data impact analysis would strive to demonstrate similar impacts to managing the people's data. What is DIA? Some of these factors are pretty obvious, and they would be the foundation for an ongoing index of the data inventory already suggested. And it would be one of the jobs of the state's chief data officer to oversee the implementation of these components. But as always, the overriding objective is to implement open data. Make the people's data readily available to the people who paid for it. My friends, I've tried your patience, kept you perhaps too long. So I thank you for hanging in with my discourse. I'd like to close with one final point. Nothing that I have talked about, open data, chief data officers, who benefits from open data, none of that is novel. These ideas, philosophies, policies, and applications have been implemented at all levels of government for at least the past 5 to 10 years. Check out the impressive work in Washington State, led by its Governor Jay Inslee. Take a look at what's going on in New Jersey. These things are not novel, except with some exceptions in New Mexico. That does it for this afternoon, good people. Should you be significantly intrigued and want more on the subject of open data, I would be glad to add you and your email to our topical newsletter, which we publish on the first of every month, and it's free. Just send me a message and say something along the lines of, please add me to the ITPD mailing list. And that's a wrap. Gentlemen, do we have any questions from our viewers?